Okay. Test, test, test. Testing. Maybe I can move this down here like this. How's that? Better? Okay.
Our technology chat is completely awesome. Well, good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you today. My name is Tom Owen. I'm the Associate Dean for Teacher Education. How did I just talk really loud? Is that good? Yes. Okay. How's that? It takes this whole room to help me use technology, so thanks to each of you for your help. My name is Tom Owenby. I'm the Associate Dean for Teacher Education here at UW-Madison, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our first event in the 2024-2025 Indigenous Education Speaker Series. And it will be a presentation by Dr. Patty Loew. If you could join me in a round of applause, please. I'd like to thank the Department of Educational Policy Studies, the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, and the Mary T. Kellner Teacher Education Center for their co-sponsorship of this event. I'd also like to thank our friends from PBS Wisconsin for joining us here and sharing their amazing resources around Indigenous education here in Wisconsin. A special shout out to our virtual attendees. If everyone could turn around and wave at the camera, please. These are, yes, hello. We're streaming this live on our YouTube channel. And those of you who are attending virtually, feel free to add questions into the chat, and we'll be able to address those during our Q&A at the end of Dr. Loew's remarks. As you can see on the slide here, we'll have a presentation that will be from about noon to 1, and at the end of that time, we'll have about 10 minutes for a Q&A. We'll then have a short break, and then for those of you who are able, we invite you to stick around for a facilitated debrief of Dr. Loew's remarks. We feel that education happens in spaces where there's room for reflection, both individually and in conversation with others. And so we've intentionally designed this event with both of these elements to give space for both that learning and that reflection. Before I invite Dr. Ron Jetty to introduce Dr. Loew, I'd like to share a land acknowledgement from our School of Education's Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Humans have called this place home for over 12,000 years. Today, we acknowledge that the University of Wisconsin-Madison resides on the ancestral land of the Ho-Chunk Nation, the people of the Big Voice, who have called this place Dejope from time immemorial. As a university community, we continue to create and build upon our partnerships with the 12 First Nations of Wisconsin. And as a state university, we respect the inherent sovereignty and unique legal status as affirmed and set forth in both state and federal law of Wisconsin's tribal nations. I'd now like to invite Dr. Ron Jetty to introduce Dr. Loew.
Thank you, Tom. The one day this week I choose a sport coat out of the closet, and we get an 80-degree day here in Madison, so sorry for that. But what a special day indeed. A beautiful day outside, beautiful October, autumn day, great day to reflect on some storytelling here. So, you know, we can't survive or perpetuate culture without stories. Who gets to tell those stories? And what stories are told? Those are the kind of questions that drove me to become a school teacher, the mismatch between what was shared with me as a Dakota and Ojibwe child, and the mismatch between what was shared at home and what official knowledge was represented at school. And so, you know, I think back on different kinds of storytelling. My grandmother, I used to read the Turtle Mountain Star to her. And I think she liked hearing that story from, you know, those stories to be shared with her from her grandson. And I loved listening, what I wouldn't give to go back and spend another afternoon with my grandmother. So again, who gets to tell those stories and what stories are being told? That led me to a career in education and ultimately to the graduate program in education here at Wisconsin. And when I got here to Madison in 1993 and heard from some other friends that there was an Ojibwe broadcaster on television, I immediately thought of my grandmother because in the 1970s and 80s in North and South Dakota, Indigenous broadcasters were not delivering the news on television. So I will guarantee you that in addition to the couple of soap opera stories, my grandma used to call them her programs. In addition to those WKOW broadcasts, that would have been appointment television for my grandmother. So Patty did all of that. She reported on you know, the rights, the treaty rights struggles of the Ojibwe to enforce their rights to hunt, fish, and gather in the ceded territories up north. And so she did all that and was a Hall of Fame broadcaster. And that wasn't enough, so she decided she would go on and become a legendary Ojibwe educator as well. And so she came here to the University of Wisconsin and developed research and writing that led to two different books: Indian Nations of Wisconsin, Histories of Endurance and Renewal, and a fourth grade textbook, or elementary textbook, Native Peoples of Wisconsin. Foundational work for Act 31 to implement. These books belong in every school classroom in Wisconsin. And I don't need to say much more about that. Patty set out that, and this is School of Ed, so this is where I'm going to highlight those educational texts. She's gone on to do many more different kinds of storytelling in her career at Northwestern, a lot of which we're going to get to see here today. So without further ado, legendary Ojibwe educator, Patty Loew.
I just have to pinch myself and make sure I'm not dead, because that felt like more of an epitaph than anything else. And the one thing you didn't mention that I will mention, because our good friends are outside the door here and filming today, is once I finished with, well, as I was concluding my work in commercial television, I redeemed myself in public television. So PBS Wisconsin is a big part of my professional career, and some of the best years that I have spent here in Madison. So I just wanted to give them a shout out. Okay. First of all, thank you for that land acknowledgement. It's always nice to be in a space where people remember the original people in an area. Patty Loew, Indigenous Mashkazibi, and Dojaba. My name is Patty Loew. My Ojibwe name is Waswaknokwe, which means torchlight on the water woman. I'm a citizen of Mashkazibi, which is the Bad River Band of Lake Superior Ojibwe or Chippewa. And I'm really grateful that you have invited me here to speak with you today. So we're going to talk about Indigenous ways of knowing, learning by doing. I have always been about experiential learning and service learning, and I'm really excited to share some of my thoughts with you, because I know that there are some kindred spirits in this room. So I want to talk about 4 projects. These canoes carry culture. Some of you may remember Wayne Vallier, who actually had a project here at UW-Madison, and was the person who worked with, I think it was the folklore folks here on campus, to do Indigenous winter games. So there were snow snakes and all kinds of really interesting games. But he is a master canoe builder, one of probably a half dozen in the country. And he came to Northwestern. I was lucky enough to serve as the director of the Center for Native American and Indigenous Research at the time, and had the opportunity to bring in elders and residents. At the same time, I was also teaching a class called Native American Environmental Issues in the Media, and so there was some really wonderful opportunities for some synergy between those two positions that I held. I also want to talk about an Indigenous tour of Northwestern, and I will say right now that I ripped off the idea from Aaron Birdbear, who created an Indigenous tour here on campus. His was a walking tour that included a lot of the Indian mounds, and I'm all about media, so I used his idea, and I always give him attribution. I always tell him that I ripped off his idea, and he's okay with that. But we created a multimedia tour, an online tour, and as well as a walking tour that used audio echoes. So I'll tell you more about that when I get there. I also want to talk to you about the White Corn Harvest Service Learning project that we did every year with my undergraduates. And then if there's time, I want to talk about an NSF grant project that there's a couple of different layers to it. There's a 3D IMAX type film, and I say IMAX type because I learned that that's proprietary. It's a giant screen film that will appear in science museums next year. And my part was to work with 4 tribal teens in 4 indigenous communities in North America to do climate-related stories. So I'll tell you about that as well. First, these canoes carry culture, and if you're listening remotely, if you Google "these canoes carry culture," it'll take you to this website. And I would really encourage you to explore this because it's really dense. Now, I mentioned that I taught this class, Native American Environmental Issues in the Media, which drew primarily journalists, but also Native students who were interested in culture. I had education students, and the School of Education and Social Policy was a unit at Northwestern, and this is where all the people who were interested in making good trouble, as John Lewis would say, resided. So I had a lot of them take my classes as well. And so in a class like that, here we have this master canoe builder coming to campus. He's going to build a canoe with everybody on campus, including people from the American Indian Museum, the American Indian Center in Chicago. So there were community people as well. But I had students that were non-journalists who were interested in creating projects that would help create a dense website around this project. So across the top, you'll see I had students who were print journalists. So they did newspaper type stories, print stories. A story on the builder himself, the traditions of canoe building in the wider community, the Treaty of Chicago that removed Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa people from what's now Chicago and Evanston and removed them west of the Mississippi River, with stops along the way in Iowa and, let's see, well, no, that is west of the Mississippi River. I'm going to take that back, rewind. Anyway, you know that from the Indian Removal Act, there was this grand idea to move all the Native people living east of the Mississippi River to points west of the Mississippi River. So this is, the Treaty of Chicago sent lots of Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwe to parts west. Wayne brought some apprentices that he's working with. So one of the stories was on the apprentices that worked with him. And then kind of a how-to of building a canoe without, he used modern equipment, you know, saws and power drills and such, but he also created this beautiful piece of technology in a traditional fashion. I had students who were interested in documentary production. And I had some non-journalists who were interested in video, as everybody is, you know, in this age of TikTok and YouTube. So there was a documentary. I'll just play a little bit of it, and the whole thing is on YouTube. But I'm not going to play. I'm not going to get us.
My name is Wayne Vallier. I'm from Lac du Flambeau, Wisconsin. I'm an Ojibwe Anishinaabe Native person. I'm a grandfather, I'm a father, I'm an uncle, and I'm an educator. We only have maybe six master builders that are Ojibwe in North America. So out of 10 million Ojibwe, that's a pretty small amount. That's a scary amount. And when you're talking about,
all right, so there's a full length, well, not a full length, short length documentary, 6 minutes or so. There's podcasts. There are a lot of young people who are really into podcasts, and so there were at least 5 or 6 students in the class who wanted to do podcasts. So they worked in teams, in some cases, and they created podcasts. The future of Native American practices and culture on campus. So they kind of pulled some of the themes out more widely. This was super cool. So one of our students was a computer engineer, and he said he wanted to build a 3D model of the canoe. And so, hope I can, oh, maybe it just needed to, hate that when this doesn't work. It could be, oh, there we go, okay. So he took 144 photos of this canoe and put it together. You can roll it around, you can zoom into it, you can look at the detailing. Very cool. The other thing that Wayne was really interested in, and part of being an Indigenous educator and researcher or outreach professional, is those 4 R's that you probably come across now. If you have respect, relationship, responsibility, reciprocity, if you do use those as your check down, and you can say, yes, my project, my teaching, my outreach hits those 4 values, then it's going to be successful and it's going to have integrity. Well, one of the things is reciprocity. And we asked Wayne, you know, of course we were paying him for his elder in residency, but we asked him if there was anything that he wanted to get out of this project. Wayne is committed to protecting the Ojibwe language. So one of the things that he was really interested in was incorporating some kind of a language aspect into his project. And so this is what we did. If you click on this, you'll hear
Niganjiman, the bow, represents the future. Wagaduwatik, the stem piece.
So the entire canoe, Jiman, has parts to it that Wayne relates in Ojibwe and in English, and also imparts some cultural depth to. In which case, the bow of the canoe is also the word in Ojibwe for future. The stern of the canoe is also the Ojibwe word for past. So you see, there's more to this beautiful piece of technology than just a thing that floats on water. And as an aside, do you know that this is a perfect piece of technology? The canoe, it hasn't changed shape in 10,000 years. It's pretty cool. And then we had students who were really focused on photography. So they wanted to create a timeline. So as you can kind of move through each day and see the progress of the canoe and read just a little headline of what's going on that day. And then we had our canoe launch ceremony that was really cool. And for some of us, I remember I had to take a moment. I had to step away because as an Ojibwe person, I realized that this was probably the first time that a birch bark canoe was launched in Lake Michigan at that spot since my tribe and the Odawa and Potawatomi were forced to give up that land. So it was this moment that was so much bigger for me. It was also big for my students because not only had they created media around this project, but many of them had actually worked on it. They were building and sanding and polishing and carrying and launching, and it was quite a media event. When everything was said and done, I think there were something like 40 stories that had been done, including National Network News did a story on the weekend that we launched. It was front page with a 90-point type on the Chicago Tribune. So it got a lot of attention, and it became much larger than just a canoe project. It was about language reclamation. It was about maintaining a consistent presence. A lot of people in Chicago didn't know there were Native people still around, and Chicago has one of the largest populations of Native people in the country. So it was an opportunity to have so many more discussions, all centered around this beautiful project, and I was really proud to be part of it. Okay, so one of the other things was this project that I appropriated from Aaron Birdbear here at Wisconsin. And again, trying to figure out a way to connect a wider community and have larger discussions around a project that would give my students an experiential learning opportunity. And it wasn't really hard to find 14 spots on the Northwestern campus where Native American people, places, issues coincided with a geographic spot. And so I'll just walk you through the connections that we made. And again, if you Google, if you're here remotely, Google Indigenous Tour of Northwestern, and it'll take you to this website. So this is the online presence, but there's also an audio tour. So if you download an app called Echoes and you walk through campus, if you get within 30 yards of one of these designated spots, you'll hear a drum, and then you'll hear the historical information associated with that spot. So we, of course, as you did here, started with a land acknowledgement. So there's also a map too, so you can either, as the tour progresses, you can either go to a geographical spot on the map, click on that, and it'll take you to the spot, or you can step through in a sequential order. So this is the one I wanted to tell you. This is such a cool story. In 1987, I was, it was even earlier than that, maybe 1985. I met this fellow, Nelson Shepo, who became kind of my surrogate grandfather as a result of some of our interactions. And Nelson was Potawatomi, Prairie Band Potawatomi, but he had married an Ojibwe woman and lived on the Lac du Flambeau reservation. And I was doing personality profiles of Native people as part of my work for the ABC affiliate. Came across him, and he was just fascinating. And I interviewed him. Turns out he was the nephew of a Potawatomi by the name of Numke, who was one of the people removed from Chicago and sent to Kansas. The Prairie Band was originally sent to Kansas. So he starts telling me this story, and he's speaking in both Potawatomi and immediately translating himself in English. So I'm going to play just a little part of this, because this is just really fascinating.
But when we came down here from Chicago, Skunktown, Chicago, that's when we went. You get me out, upscale, when that pale-face come, that white man. Michigan, with Steve Ingold, I say, one year, Stumbish. When we went to that's when we went to Michigan and come back and crossed the Mississippi, Skokie, that second Park tribe.
So we're doing this interview, and I realized the historical significance of this. You know, he has heard this story firsthand from his uncle, this monumental event in Native American history. And at that time, in 1986, there weren't any, well, there was one Native American museum, but it was, at the time, in chaos because one of their non-Native curators had stolen some artifacts, and it was just, it was, so I couldn't give this, I didn't feel right in giving this interview to that institution. So I gave it to the State Historical Society and I said, protect this, this is really important. So fast forward now, it's 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I'm putting this Indigenous tour together, and one of the stops is Lake Michigan and the Treaty of Chicago, and I'm thinking, oh, I have that, you know, I had that amazing interview. So I called the State Historical Society, they digitized it for me, we included it in the tour, and it was really interesting because my project director recently got her Ojibwe name at the Honor of the Earth powwow a couple of weeks ago at the Lakudere Reservation. And one of her relatives, one of the people that attended the naming ceremony, was his granddaughter, and she had never met him, and I mean, that's why these things are just so precious. And now everybody can meet this lovely man and hear his important story and be inspired, I think, to learn more about what happened during Indian removal. Our students on campus had a garden that they maintained. The Pakagan Potawatomi, who was the tribe that was our nearest neighbor, has an emphasis on food sovereignty, as a lot of tribes are doing lately. And so it was a really great opportunity for us to connect the Pakagan food sovereignty program with the garden at Northwestern. This is one of my favorite stops. Eli Suzukovich, who's a descendant of the Little Shell Chippewa band in Montana, teaches a class on climate change and uses maple trees on campus as the conduit for learning. So the students are tapping maple trees and making maple syrup and learning about climate change. And one of the students in my class who is interested in documentaries, this is a 1-minute video that I'm going to play. So it just gives you an insight into the kind of things that you'll find in the story.
That I'd learn to make maple syrup using sap from trees on campus, but that's what I did this quarter in my class called Maple Syrup and Climate Change. We had to filter the sap before cooking it. You could use cheesecloth, but all we had on hand was a t-shirt. We had so much sap, many buckets full, and even more that had been stored and frozen in gallon-sized Ziploc bags. The sap should reach 7 degrees above the boiling point of water, 219 degrees Fahrenheit. You wait until all the excess water is boiled away, and then finally you have a darker, thicker liquid. It starts to boil a lot. As soon as it hits 219 degrees, you have to remove it from the heat. Otherwise, it will turn into maple sugar and can burn. We stored our syrup in 3 mason jars. Then we ate it with small waffles, but since I've brought my whole jar of maple syrup into the dining hall. It took 10 hours, but I'd definitely do it again. It's just really neat to have this product that we made from the trees. It's much more intimate than maple syrup bought at the store.
Yep. So there's Carlos Montezuma got his doctorate at, he got his medical degree at Northwestern. That was an Indian boarding school, so our School of Education and Social Policy became a stop so that we could talk about boarding schools. Northwestern has one of the largest collections of Inuit art, and it's all been purchased and provenanced. It's a contemporary art collection, so we felt okay showing that, featuring that. Carlisle played Northwestern in 1903 in football and whooped the Northwestern team. But it was a really good opportunity. Actually, 3 of the players from the Carlisle team wound up transferring to Northwestern. One became an All-American football quarterback, and the other 2, one became the mayor of a town in Washington, the other became a dentist who had a flourishing practice in Puerto Rico. So there were all these just really interesting little historical tidbits that we were able to share. The basketball floor of the Ryan Arena, basketball arena, is made with Menominee lumber. So that was a good opportunity to talk about the Menominee forest and termination and relocation. So you can see the kinds of connections that we were trying to make. Northwestern was the original location for the first naval ROTC program. So that was an opportunity for us to talk about the disproportionate number of Native Americans who enlist in the military. We had some art on campus. Our center was located a block from Sheridan Drive, which runs through Evanston. So we were able to talk about good old General Sheridan. The only good Indian is a dead Indian guy. And activism, Northwestern has this rock that gets painted. Student groups petition for the right to paint the rock, and they can share their messages, their political, social messages. And so that was another opportunity that we used to talk about how our center came to be, because it was student activism. John Evans, for whom Evanston is named, and the founder of Northwestern, depending on which historical record you believe, either was or was not the principal architect of the Sand Creek Massacre. So the university had a whole lot of atoning to do, and so we were able to tell that story at the Rock. And then the rights of nature movement. We have a bird sanctuary, so we were able, you all know what the rights of nature is. Nature has the right to exist and persist and thrive. And a number of tribal communities and indigenous communities around the world are passing ordinances and laws basically acknowledging personhood for nature. The White Earth Ojibwe have acknowledged personhood for wild rice. The government of New Zealand acknowledged, they say granted, but that's, I'm uncomfortable with that, acknowledged personhood for the Wanganui River, which is a sacred river to the Maori. Ecuador passed a constitutional amendment establishing rights of nature in their constitution. So anyway, that's the tour of Indigenous tour of Northwestern. I told you about that class I taught. One of the things that I incorporated into the class each fall was an experiential learning, service learning experience on the Oneida Reservation. In early to mid-October, the Oneida have a white corn cooperative. These are families that come together to grow their traditional white corn, which is not sold. It's bartered, but it's not a commercial operation. And this is really the first time that my students experienced a non-capitalistic, a gift economy, if you will. And they're reading Robin Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass at the same time, so there's some synergy there as well. And this is usually like the second week of our quarter, and so this is a bonding experience for students. When they come home, they're, we leave on a Friday, we come back on a Sunday night. They're like this after those two long bus rides and this work that they're doing. And it's not all work. I want to show you one of the things that the Oneida like to do. They have these really old-timey corn strippers that are like Rube Goldberg machines. And so we had our amazing race, we called it. Go! handle fell off there. Hand cranking. That's Tony House, who teaches at UW-Oshkosh. Did they win? So it's a really fun weekend, but you know, my students have the opportunity to work side by side with Oneida tribal members who feed us and share so much of their culture with us. And we have a talking circle the Sunday Sunday afternoon that we leave, and you know, half of us are in tears, and it's really a beautiful experience. And one of the things that I've noticed is after this, the classroom discussions, because students have bonded in a really beautiful way, the classroom discussions have so much depth, and students are so vulnerable and supportive and respectful of each other. It's you know, I'm convinced that service learning is really a great element to add into almost any educational experience. Okay, Ice Worlds. This is the IMAX. Oh, thanks. So there's this IMAX type film, I should say, giant screen film, which will also become a PBS series. And then my part of it was to work with teenagers in 4 communities. And I was looking for climate change programs that were empowering. You know, you know, Native Americans have been adapting to climate change since the last ice age. We know a few things. And so I was really interested in tribes that were really using innovation and ingenuity and creativity to meet challenges, so that these stories would be empowering and they wouldn't be just, you know, hide sharp objects because it's depressing. So in Quinault, which is on the far western part of Washington, they're doing amazing. They're engineering log jams. They've been losing their salmon for quite a few years because the Anderson Glacier, which moderated their salmon-producing river, the Quinault River, totally melted 4 years ago. So the river is just all messed up, and it's getting warmer, and it's really fast moving now because the glacier is melted, and so there's they've really been, their salmon fishery, which once was one of the best in the world, is now really diminished. So what they're doing is their environmental department people have talked to the elders and said, you know, well, where did the salmon originally spawn? And then based on that, they're creating these enormous log jams with Douglas fir and Sitka spruce and big hunks of concrete, and they're dropping them in different parts of the river, and then putting soil on top of that and planting Sitka spruce and Douglas. They're growing new islands and creating new places, new old places where the salmon are spawning, and the salmon are coming back. It's one of the most, I get chills just thinking about it. So that was the story we wanted to tell. The Porch Band of Creek in Alabama are restoring their longleaf pine forest. We thought that was and using traditional burning techniques to bring the forest back. Thought that was a good story. The Onondaga are in New York, are doing some really interesting things with lands that have been horribly polluted by industry. They're reclaiming those lands, and then Bad River. Of course, I'm a little partial to Bad River, and so wanted to do a wild rice story. These are just excerpts.
Welcome to Mushkazibing. This is where our medicine grows.
UW alum, Dylan Brennan.
Mushkazibing is what we call home, but others know us as the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe. We live along the south shore of Lake Superior. In good years, as much as 800 acres of manoomin or wild rice will grow here in the Kakagan sloughs. It's August and we're ricing.
When I think of harvesting manoomin, I think of the sound that you hear when you're out there, and all the different sounds. So you hear the water, you hear all the different birds that are in that place, that call that place home. You know, you hear the sound of that manoomin, that sh sh sh, as you're knocking that manoomin into your canoe. You hear the sound of that manoomin sprinkling into your canoe, which is a really beautiful sound too. You know, and so you hear all those sounds, and you know, to me, you know, I always just think of how grateful and how lucky we are to have that. So when I think of manoomin and harvesting manoomin, I think of all those things.
This place that we're at today is where the food grows on top of the water. As long as we take care of this food, it will take care of us. So every time I put my tobacco out to get in this boat, I'm grateful for this rice that's here and everything that's out here. And we have to protect this place.
Manoomin is an annual relative. Not all of it makes it into the canoe, and that's okay. Some goes back into the water and recedes the bit. The rest goes to tribal members like Bernsey, who has been processing rice for almost his whole life.
And this machine separates it. And after we get done with separating it and getting it clean like that, we run it through the second time, and we get all the dust out. There's not a bit of dust in it. So, and I built this, oh, I don't know, how long we've been in business, son?
We've been over 10 years, about 10 years.
About 10 years?
But you had this way before.
Yeah, we've been in business about 10 years here. Built this, and I got this here separator from Lincoln, Nebraska.
Anyway, I wanted to show you a little segment of that. We talk about protecting the rice and new harvesting techniques and a number of other things. There's an element about solar power. Bad River, which some of you may know is under threat from major pipeline, invested a lot of its COVID dollars into micro solar farms. So we have our clinic is totally off the grid, our wastewater treatment center is off the grid, our fish hatchery is off the grid, and part of the administration building in our central tribal area. And I guess, you know, it's one thing to say not in my backyard, it's another thing to show that we're making changes that we need to make. So that, and then there's another story about black ash basketry and the impact of changing climate and the emerald ash borer. So I'm excited about these stories. I think they're going to be nice complements. The students did them all on smartphones. They produced all the original music that you heard. They basically did the paper editing. I did the actual button pushing, but they were really heavily involved in all aspects of putting the stories together. And they'll be introducing their films at the Science Museum in their area when the big film rolls. There's a whole outreach component to that. So with that, I was asked to stop at 12:50, and there I'm done. Okay. Once a TV person. I can't help it, you know. I spent 45 years in television, so if you tell me that you want me to stop at 1:50, it's going to be right down to the second.
Thank you so much. We now have exactly 10 minutes, I guess, according to Patty, for question and answer. Kelly and Ron have microphones, and so those of you who have questions, raise your hand, and they'll make their way to hand you the mic so you can share your question. Caitlin will also be checking in on the live stream to see if any folks have questions there. So, question in the back.
Hi, Dr. Loew. My name is Daniel Schuyler. I was wondering how you, who did you meet in Oneida, or how did you get, how did you start going up there?
Yeah. I think I've always known Becky Webster from her time here at UW. And Leah Zeiss, who's Laura Manthi's mom, was involved in agriculture here. Dan Cornelius was in my class. His parents audited my class. So I think I was always destined to hang out with the Oneida. But you know what, yeah, I can't really remember. But it was probably one of those, hey, if you're around, why don't you come up and help out? And me saying, oh, I got some students, can I bring some students along? And it was, you know, and then it was 6 or 7 years of helping out with the harvest.
Oh, here, sorry.
Bonjour, Patty.
Bonjour.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm also Bad River, and I'm currently working on a project with Bad River to, well, to try to solve some problems with unethical research with tribes. So, focusing
With what research?
Any kind of research with tribes. So,
who are your people now?
Morrison family.
Oh, okay, Morrison's. All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more. I know you said the 4 R's of research, but just what does it look like to you to truly do indigenous methodology with tribal people and protections of privacy and life?
Thank you so much for that question. That's such an important question. And it's something, you know, in my early academic career, I bristled at how research was conducted. Some of you may know that there's, I want to talk about indirects, the administration cost. So anytime you get a federal grant, I think it's what, 62.5% now of it comes right off the top and goes to the submitting academic institution, or it could be any institution. But so $1 million grant becomes basically a $450,000 grant. What I saw was academics coming up with research about Native people and then seeing, oh, there's a rider. If we include a Native tribe in our research, we can get an extra, you know, $50,000 or $100,000. So it seemed to me that what I was observing were these research projects were pretty much all framed and ready to go. And then at the last minute, a tribal community or a Native serving organization would be brought in at the last moment, and then they'd have to contort and figure out if they were going to twist their way to match the, you know, the parameters of this grant. And then, you know, there were subcontracts given to the tribal entity, and a lot of times, you know, really no collaboration at all. And then eventually things would hit the fan and the tribal community would find out, holy, you got $550,000 and we got a subcontract for $30,000 or $50,000. And there was a lot of resentment, and those relationships don't last. So one of the things that was really exciting to me as we built our center at Northwestern, and I remember the dean asking me what my goals were, and I said, I have no idea. And you know, he looked at me, wait a minute, you're our director, you know, what do you mean you don't know what your goals are? And I said, because that's the problem. You know, I need at least a year, maybe 2, to visit the tribal communities in our area, to meet the American Indian Center people, to meet the people at the Mitchell Museum, to meet the, you know, the Title VI people in Chicago public schools. And then and after I listen to them, then I'll tell you what my goals are. So that was the way we started, and we spent 2 years just relationship building, finding out who people were, what they needed. And I'll tell you, with all due respect to the pure researchers in the room, when I've gone into Indian country and said, you know, so what do you, I'm from UW-Madison or I'm from Northwestern, what do you need? Not one has ever told me that what they really needed was a peer-reviewed research article in a top-tier research journal. You know, I mean, so this was the kind of research that was needed in Native communities. We needed a different approach. And granted, it's more difficult for a public institution. You know, Northwestern was a private institution with an $11 billion endowment. So we could flip things there and say, okay, we'll help you write this grant. You submit it, you get the 62 and write us a subcontract. And so, you know, that was one of the ways we flipped the script. Not always possible for public institutions, but I think there's still a way. You know, we also looked at, we were hearing, we can't send people to Chicago, or we can't send people to Madison. We need you guys to come to us and set up things, externships rather than internships. So, you know, we thought about, and then you mentioned data sovereignty, and you mentioned some knowledge that, you know, should not be shared. That was one of the other things we were really concerned about. We have this big research project going on right now. One of the people is a computer scientist who basically created a lockbox in the middle of our research. And only the tribal historic preservation officers can get into that last spot and decide, so that if we're collecting research and we collect something that we shouldn't have, or, you know, because sometimes when you build trust in Native communities, people share things with you, and you don't even know at that moment whether it's something that should be shared or not. So in all the research projects we do, we involve the TIPOs, and we basically say, you're in charge of the traditional ecological knowledge and which of it, you know, what part of it could be or should be shared. And then we have all these keys, and the TIPOs have that last key to open up that last box. So that's one thing that, you know, was really important to us, because there's so much information that has been collected about Native people since the Jesuits arrived here in the 1500s. And, you know, a lot of it is a better description of the people that collected it than it is the Native people themselves. And you know, don't we have the right to correct the record? Don't we have the right to decide what kind of research is going to be done on us? Don't we have the right to say, we want to collaborate with, you know, on this research, and ultimately we're going to control the knowledge that, you know, is shared out. So that's really kind of a core piece of who I am as a researcher and what I tried to create at Northwestern.
We have time for one more question. Time goes so quickly.
Patty, that's so appreciate your time with us today. My name is Dan Pell. I'm in the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Mentoring here. One thing that one reaction I have to watching all these experiential learning things that you've created is that I'm autistic, and autism is often described as a disorder of the senses. And my path through education has been very unconventional, partly because this kind of lecture-based, you know, non-experiential learning style that the university is good at reproducing doesn't really work for me. I'm highly sensory, and so, like, looking at your pictures, those smells. You know, I was out in the Wigwasi-Jiman when Wayne was in town a month ago. Thank you, Ron. The smell of that canoe I will never forget. You know, and the experience that went with it I will never forget. And I'm curious, as you've been doing these, if you have noticed or heard any feedback from people who likewise are maybe neurodivergent or have different ways of learning, finding that this kind of approach to learning is meeting their needs in a different way.
I am so glad you asked that, because we have a fairly high rate of autism in Native American communities, and some of the kids that I worked with at Bad River were on the spectrum, and they absolutely loved the digital music programs that are the first things we teach, and felt a real sense of pride that their music score was used, you know, to provide the soundtrack for a lot of the documentaries that our kids did. So one of the things, you know, that's something that I've tried to be cognizant of as I've grown as an educator, is understanding that people learn in different ways. And if somebody who's part of a group that I'm educating isn't learning, I really feel like that's on me, because we all learn in different ways, and I just need to know what floats that person's boat, what they're interested in, and how they can shine. And if I do that, then they're going to learn, and I'm going to be a successful educator.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Tom for our formal closure.
So Patty, in appreciation, Caitlin is going to, or I think Ron is going to share a bag with gifts for you, and I'll just give brief descriptions of those. The seed-by-seed bag that the gifts are within, and which is a gift itself, features artwork by Ho-Chunk artists Molly Palio and UW-Madison faculty members Marianne Fairbanks and Stephen Hilliard. The design incorporates symbols, imagery, and traditional colors of the Ho-Chunk Nation, and the full-size banners can be also seen hanging in front of Bascom Hall from time to time. We also have Manuman, as well as maple syrup that comes from Spirit Lake Native Farms. The owner-operators of the farm are Bruce and Tawny Savage. Mr. Savage was also recently elected tribal chairperson of the Fond du Lac Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa. You'll also find some summer honey produced by bees right here in Madison and harvested by local beekeeper Kurt Reisenheimer. And finally, we have a mug from the Teacher Education Center.
Thank you, thank you.
Those of you on the live stream, we're going to turn off the live stream now, so thank you for attending. For those of you who are here in person, if you are available to stick around, we'll now shift to our guided reflection and debrief. For those of you who need to head out, we'll have a short break for you to do so. Patty, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.